Why would one man decide to erase an entire people from the face of the earth? What kind of darkness must take root in a human soul to justify postcards to survive? He slept on park benches and in public libraries. It was a dark, lonely time. But he was not alone. Dangerous ideas began to keep him company. He found them in cheap pamphlets and cafe conversations. Nationalism, racism, conspiracy theories. Vienna at that time was a cultural melting pot. Jews, Slavs, Hungarians, and Germans all shared the same space. But beneath the surface, tensions were boiling. The Jewish community was active and successful in the arts, science, and banking. For the frustrated and the failed, this success was viewed with a toxic mix of mistrust and envy. And there was Hitler, absorbing it all. It wasn't an overnight transformation, it was a slow poisoning. Little by little, his personal failures began to find scapegoats. It was easier to hate a group with a face and a name than to accept that he simply wasn't good enough. He watched the mayor of Vienna, Karl Lueger, a man who used anti-Semitism as a political weapon to win votes. Hitler took note. He realized that words could move the masses, and the masses could be used to build empires or destroy civilizations. The dreamer was dying. In his place, something harder and darker was emerging, because when art dies, fanaticism often takes its place. On June 28, 1914, a bullet in Sarajevo set the world on fire. For a failed artist with no future, World War I was a gift. Finally, Hitler could belong to something greater than himself. He enlisted in the German army, serving as a messenger on the Western Front. He was wounded. He was decorated. He was marked forever. But it wasn't the gunpowder that left the deepest scar. It was the ending. When Germany signed the armistice in 1918, Hitler was in a hospital bed, temporarily blinded by gas. He couldn't understand it. How had they lost? The soldiers were still holding the line. It didn't feel like a military defeat, so it had to be a betrayal. Thus was born the stab-in-the-back myth. A conspiracy theory that claimed Germany hadn't been defeated by enemies on the battlefield, but by internal enemies: Jews, communists, and traitors. The Treaty of Versailles followed, imposing brutal conditions and public humiliation on Germany. For Hitler, this was unbearable. He looked for someone to blame for the economic bankruptcy and the national shame. And he found them. Once again, the Jews became the perfect narrative for a country searching for simple explanations for its pain. The frustrated young man who once wanted to paint landscapes now began to paint enemies in the mind of an entire nation. Germany in the 1920s was a wasteland of broken pride. Inflation turned money into wallpaper. Bread lines were longer than hope. In that chaos, Hitler's voice began to echo. He joined a small group called the German Workers' Party. No one knew him, but when he spoke, his rage was contagious. His oratory was hypnotic. He didn't just invent anti-Semitism, he institutionalized it. In 1925, he published Mein Kampf, a manifesto of hatred disguised as ideology. In it, he made his vision clear. Germany could only be saved through the eradication of the Jews and the conquest of living space. But books weren't enough. He needed spectacle. Nazism became a visual machine. Torchlit marches, red flags, striking symbols. Every event was a choreography of fanaticism. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the people were starving for identity. Hitler promised them order. He promised them jobs. He promised them pride. In 1933, he was appointed Chancellor. By 1934, he was the Führer. The state became his reflection, and in that reflection, there was no longer any place for the Jews. Hatred was no longer just rhetoric, it was law. Behind the laws, a precise industrial machine was built, a structure designed not just to isolate, but to eliminate. It began with small prohibitions. Jews couldn't hold office. Then they couldn't marry Germans. Then they were forced to wear the Star of David. Propaganda portrayed them as parasites. Dehumanization was the first step. Then came the ghettos, walled-off neighborhoods of misery, and finally, the final solution. Beginning in 1942, 6 extermination camps were built in occupied Poland: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. These were not labor camps. They were factories of death: train, selection, gas chamber, crematorium. Repeat. At Auschwitz, the efficiency was chilling. The elderly, children, and the weak were sent directly to the gas. The rest were worked until they collapsed. The sign at the entrance read, "Work sets you free." It was the ultimate lie. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a system designed by bureaucrats, engineers, and doctors. It was the most terrifying demonstration of what happens to civilization when ethics disappear. The war ended. The guns fell silent. But for the survivors, the horror was only beginning. They emerged from the camps as skeletal shadows. Many had no homes to return to. Their families were gone. Their communities were annihilated. The Holocaust left invisible wounds in language, in culture, and in faith. How do you believe in a just God after Auschwitz? The Holocaust was more than a crime. It was a moral abyss. It didn't happen in secret. It happened in plain sight, with the complicity of thousands and the indifference of millions. History reminds us that hatred does not die. It transforms. It changes shape. It disguises itself as ideology, religion, or patriotism. It always finds excuses. It always finds victims. That is why remembering is not an option. It is a duty. We must recognize the warning signs, the contempt for those who are different, the normalization of hatred, the silence of the majority. Every time we forget, we open the door for history to repeat itself. The Holocaust is a mirror. It forces us to look at ourselves and decide, are we part of the silence or part of the memory? Never again must be more than a phrase. It must be a commitment. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to History Beyond Battle, because the stories we tell here are the ones that ensure we never forget. See you in the next video.